Let me rattle off some names. Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Paul Felder, Edson Barbosa, Benil Dariush, Dan Hooker, Khabib number. I'm really bad with pronunciations. Tony Ferguson. I'm gonna just skip past Khabib's first name. What do they all have in common? The freaking lightweight division. My goodness, that's a shock tank of a division. If you're coming into the UFC, do not enter this division. Why would you enter this division? You only enter the lightweight division if A, you absolutely cannot make weight and, above and below, or you really want to test your mettle, because by far it is. What are some other names here? Cerrone, Ally, Quinta, Anthony Pettis, Alexander Hernandez. It's a shark tank. It's a shark tank of a division. So enter today's fight, Charles de Bronx. Is that his nickname? That's a boss-ass nickname. Oliveira versus Kevin Lee. And Charles is coming in with a 6-fight winning streak. So, wow. He's done his work in relative anonymity. But people are taking notice. And the UFC Brasilia card, which, by the way, is the first card that has been fought with the COVID-19 restrictions, which we're going to talk about later on, i.e. no audience, which is very interesting, and interesting to see if that played, how the fighters found that. But yeah, Kevin Lee and Charles Oliveira coming into this fight with strong momentum. Kevin Lee, if you haven't seen Kevin Lee versus Gregor Gillespie, please watch that fight and see a finish to perfection. So both fighters coming in with strong momentum. I guess that's the thing. Important to note here, in terms of the consideration, was that Kevin Lee actually missed weight for this fight. And this is disappointing. And this is something we've seen. We saw the same thing with Davison Figueiredo a couple of weeks ago. Man, time and time again, it's been mudded. But the UFC with the lightweight division and just the names that I've mudded, there's no doubt that there is scope for a 165-pound division. And I think time and time again, this is not the first time that Kevin Lee has missed weight, but it may be the last time, in the sense that he's got to really think about it. I'm sure he doesn't like forfeiting his person. At the same time, I'm sure the UFC don't like it. And fighters really hate it when their opponents miss weight. Look, obviously no one wants to proactively miss weight, but if you've had a propensity to do so time and time again, insert Kevin Lee. I'm not here to judge any fighters because I can't imagine how difficult, losing weight in that constrained time period is. But in the end of the day, I guess it is your profession. Anyway, short of it, let's get to the fight. An exciting fight it was. I think holistically, the UFC Brasilia card was pretty exciting. We got, a fair amount of finishes. Some good fights here, actually. Potentially we'll go through them later on. But, interestingly enough, again, to note, where in this lightweight shuffle, Charles Oliveira has really, as I said, toiled in anonymity. On a 6-fight winning streak, here's an interesting statement, but not all wins in the UFC are equal. But at the same time, all UFC wins are prominent. Charles Oliveira coming in with a strong 6-0 momentum in terms of wins. But at the same time, Kevin Lee, if he won this, which he did, would be his biggest scalp. So really a litmus test for both fighters. Kevin Lee, obviously, off the back of an amazing knockout with Greg Gillespie and the move to the TriStar gym, are we potentially seeing a new Kevin Lee? Obviously, the fact that he didn't make weight needs to be taken into consideration. The short of it is, when you think about it, Charles Oliveira is known for his submission skills. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. Kevin Lee, obviously, a wrestling base with heavy hands. I wouldn't say a classic fight, but really contrasts in terms of how these guys were going to fight. Coming into the fight, I think it lasted 3 rounds. And for most rounds, it kind of, apart from the 3rd round where it concluded, it kind of went very similar in that Charles came out really the aggressor, taking the center of the octagon and not bamboozling, but really, I think, shocking and surprising Kevin Lee in terms of his output from a stand-up perspective, and coming in with his, I think in the first and the second round, he came in with his jumping knees. Basically, welcome to this fight. Kevin Lee is greeted with him, and to the short of it, he was really first to the punch, cornering Kevin Lee and getting him with a lot of spinning attacks as well as short jabs and hooks to the face. So I think Kevin Lee was definitely surprised about that particular regard. But in the first round, this is how this narrative kind of played out. They get into the clinch, and I can't remember, but I believe Charles tripped him, and this is the beautiful thing about mixed martial arts, in that really at the highest levels, once you start getting in the food chain, you start seeing a lot of different weapons being propagated by a lot of different fighters, and it's really amazing. Amazing is the word when you see a technician, a black belt, a true black belt in jiu-jitsu such as Charles, and he went for, I think, a couple of different heel hooks, and inverted and a normal. But I think without getting hyper technical, which is definitely an element I can't really add a lot of credibility towards from a commentary perspective. A lot of fights, everyone loves to see the stand-up wars, mate. Did anyone see, hello, the women's fight last week in terms of Zhang Weili and Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Amazing fight. There's no doubt that that's what we want to see. But when you see a true technician, a true master of his craft in Charles Oliveira, it's just the transitions. They were so smooth. It's like water. Nothing was forced. And you just need to look at the guy's face when he was transitioning to these positions after positions. Kevin Lee is obviously a collegiate wrestler and a guy with lots of accolades and strength in his book in that particular regard. But at no one time did he feel very comfortable on the top. And you could see it. There was obviously calmness in terms of what he was doing, but there was no time where he could fully unleash some strong levels of ground and pounds, purely because Charles was throwing up submission attempt after submission attempt, and really you can't initiate and engage an attack if what you're doing is defending, especially with an individual that has is coming in with the streak that he is coming in from a submission sort of perspective. So really the first round ends with, however, Kevin Lee on top, but you can say that not a lot of damage was incurred in that particular round. Second round, the same thing. Charles comes out with his freaking knee, and he's taking the center of the octagon, really initiating the fight and taking it to Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee, you'd say, I would think coming in that he felt that, especially after that amazing KO that he had against Gregor Gillespie, that there was a lot of comfort in the stand-up. And not to say that there wasn't, but he was absolutely... The speed advantage from a striking perspective was to Charles. He's a very underrated striker, and I think holistically across the whole, it'll be interesting to see, who next. But I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. But let's go back to the fight. Where Kevin did have success was taking Charles down, and I think interestingly enough, in the upper echelon, obviously everyone's got the eyes on Khabib. This is where potentially Charles might have problems, and I believe that against Paul Felder he had a very similar. He had a loss in that Paul Felder took him down, big strong guy, wasn't able to get him off, and the same thing happened here in the second round. After Kevin decided, I ain't liking the striking hits that are happening on my face. He got taken down. He took Charles down, and was initiating there. Again, we see some really smooth transitions. Charles throwing up a lot of different submission techniques. Kev, however, getting a bit of momentum and trying a little bit of ground and pound at the end. So it's interesting because when you think of it here, Kev, both rounds were the same. How would you score them? I'm not too sure because Kev ends up with the momentum, and one would think, especially with the strikes that he was landing on top in the second half of the second round, there was momentum at his side and potentially 1-1, 2-0. I'm not too sure, but definitely Kev having a valid say in that he could potentially won both of those two rounds. Moving into the third round, I think what was amazing is they had this zoom in. Obviously, the fight is coming in, and Kevin Lee was focused. He was razor focused. He came in, again, Charles coming in with these wild and wacky striking attacks. And again, to say he's a very light, he's a quick striker. I mean, does he have the power of a Justin Gaethje? No, absolutely not. Does he have the volume hit rate of a Dustin Poirier? So, I don't know exactly how I'd compare his striking with the top echelon brass, but I'd say it's a strength. He definitely has that striking sort of prowess. Kevin didn't like it, and he charged in straight for the takedown again. Obviously, he's had success with the takedown. Unfortunately, he went straight into a guillotine, and that was it. That was it. That was all she wrote. Charles got Kevin a really good guillotine. He went down. It was really tight, and you kind of knew, Charles was, in the past 2 rounds, he was throwing up really more complicated submissions. A guillotine being one of the more simpler ones. In that particular regard, it was airtight. It was the 3rd round. Obviously, the guys were a bit tired. Kevin tapped. He tapped, and interestingly enough, when Charles released the grip, Kev got back, was complaining that he didn't tap. I'm not too sure what's happening there, to be honest. Obviously, there might have been some element of embarrassment, but the guy nearly, he nearly got choked out. So obviously, he might not have been in the best state of mind. But look, a really sort of interesting fight. Obviously, Kevin Lee not making weight. There was, even if you won that, like, what did that mean? And I think this is really interesting in terms of how the UFC handles these, given the proximity of the fact that 2 main fights in the last month have actually ended up with the outcome of the fighters not making weight. It's not a good look, man. Like, do we prepare an alternate fighter? I know for really big title fights, that's the thing. Look, both guys had a lot on the line, and I think Kevin Lee had more on the line, to be quite frank. He was the bigger name headlining the card in Brazil. And it was disappointing because, while it wasn't the most convincing performance, I do believe he was kind of ahead in the scoreboard. There was an interview with Kevin Lee after the fight, and he basically is quoted as saying that it could be a couple of years, maybe I'm throwing a hyperbole here, before you see him again. And that's a bit harsh. I think, look, fighting is a very emotional sort of sport, and you can't make that decision and statement. We saw the same thing with Paul Felder, in that he noted that he might have hanging his gloves up. Look, he's a competitor. I can't see him not wanting to come back in, but I think what he really needs to do is definitely go back, sit and think about this fight, and more importantly, think about what's the division you want to fight in. The lightweight division. He versed Tony. There's no shame in losing against Tony. A lot of people have. I don't think he has the chops to beat Khabib. Like, if wrestling is his base, his striking is potentially not as strong. It's tough. I mean, what do? Do you continue on in a place where you're potentially elite, but you're staying in that top 10 with no chance? I don't know. As with Charles, he's an interesting fighter. This is definitely the biggest scalp. And what next for Charles de Bronx? I love that name, by the way. I love it. What next for Charles de Bronx Oliveira? What I like about him is, I think he needs a little bit more seasoning. I like Paul Felder. I really like Paul Felder. I don't know. I think Charles would want someone with a winning record, but I like Paul Felder. I really like it. Part 2, just see if he can get past it. Who else? He needs another test. He definitely needs another test. But with those submission skills, could he potentially be a guy down the line that dethrones Khabib? I know, overreaction and a half potentially. But, like, when you think of the people that can dethrone Khabib, you want someone that can, either have really good takedown defense, because a lot of people have a puncher's chance in the lightweight division, Gaethje being one of them, Conor being one of them. But you've got to think, in a championship fight, if you don't take him down, if you don't knock him out early, he's going to be there. But so that threat of submission, I guess, is what I'm saying. He is it's really eye-opening when you see a really smooth operator from a jiu-jitsu perspective, and that's what I saw in Charles. And obviously, his record speaks as such. Look, guys, leave some comments below. Tell me what you think about the lightweight division, what you thought about this fight. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel below to support it. Share it for those guys that love their mixed martial arts. Talk soon and peace.